The Bhaktivedanta Book Trust Africa Division presents its 11th annual Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture titled Unboxing Traditional Modernity, a Youth Perspective. This year's lecture honors His Divine Grace Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, the spiritual master of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, also known as BBT, was established in 1972 by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The BBT is the world's largest publisher of ancient texts, epics, and contemporary works on Vedic spirituality and philosophy. The BBT has published and translated Srila Prabhupada's books in more than 90 languages, which include titles in Kiswahili, isiZulu, Amharic, Creole, isiXhosa, and Setswana, and has translations in production in various other African languages. It honors his important literary and social contribution. He has authored and translated more than 70 volumes of books based on timeless Vedic wisdom that were previously locked in the Sanskrit language. Today, his books are the preferred authoritative academic texts in Indology studies by universities across the globe.
Sabona, Molweni, Dumeliso, Dumelang, Habari, and greetings to all. Welcome to the 11th annual Bhaktivedanta Swami lecture. This year's lecture, we honor His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the spiritual master of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. My name is Arvash Supol. I'm a youth development consultant at Global Youth Solutions, and I'm honored today to go into this very impactful conversation. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Navina Radhika Dasi, and guest speaker, Hari Kanta. I would also like to acknowledge our Emeritus Trustee, His Holiness Jai Advaita Swami, Dr. Mani Singh, the Global Trustee, and Mr. Niresh Gopichand, the BBT Africa CEO.
The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, is a specialized agency of the United Nations with the aim of promoting world peace and security through international cooperation in education, arts, sciences, and culture. UNESCO's biennial meeting saw the recognition of 53 significant historical events, including the 150th birth anniversary of Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, proposed by the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, known as ISKCON, and supported by the governments of India, Russia, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Vietnam, and Thailand. This recognition marks a groundbreaking moment, as it is the first time the United Nations have honored a Vaishnava leader. Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada was a philosopher, social reformer, and eminent spiritual leader of his time. Refusing to submit to caste hierarchies and hereditary rights, instead, he aligned religious competence with personal character and religious merit. His proficiency in mathematics, Sanskrit, and traditional Indian astronomy earned him the title Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, meaning the pinnacle of wisdom.
This lecture invites young voices to share their insights on bridging the gap between past and present, while shaping a future that honors both. This theme prompts exploration of how young people navigate the delicate balance between traditional values and modern ideals. This discussion delves into how today's youth reconcile cultural heritage with contemporary influences, examining the tensions, synergies, and opportunities that arise. From perspectives on technology, social norms, and identity, to reflections on the evolving roles of community and family, I'm excited today to invite Navina Radhika Dasi, who is a communications and partnership manager, as our keynote address. Navina Radhika Dasi joined ISKCON in 2003 when she was just 16 years old and was later initiated by His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami in 2011. She holds a bachelor's degree in marketing from the Wits University and has worked in media, community engagement, and economic development in multiple industries for 15 years. Navina Radhika is currently the City of Cape Town's Communication and Partnership Manager for Water and Sanitation. She loves to travel and to experience different cultures evolving over time and has spent time in India, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya and the Seychelles, Germany, Ireland, Switzerland, the US, and Tanzania. Navina Radhika has served in multiple areas within the ISKCON community, including the following portfolios: Chairperson of the Wits Bhakti Yoga Society, Marketing Ambassador for BBT Africa, Member of the SA National Council, Chairperson for Food for Life South Africa, and Candidate South African Zonal Supervisor. With that, I warmly welcome Navina Radhika.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Arvash, for that warm introduction. It's such a pleasure to be invited to offer something and give my contribution to the topic, Unboxing Traditional Modernity. So, when I was preparing for the topic, I was thinking to myself, where spirituality is concerned, most of us spend the foundational years of our faith in learning. We learn the practices and rituals that are prescribed in the ancient sacred scriptures that our religious communities subscribe to. We attend our churches or temples or mosques, and in the beginning, we emulate the norms that are preserved within those communities, passed down from generation to generation of followers. And we value these traditions so much. We value how to bow our heads in prayer. We believe that it's wise to make sense of the teachings of philosophy by reading or studying them very strictly. And we believe that hearing from the pulpits of credible persons such as gurus, priests, or imams, add to our spiritual development. We also emulate the behavior and social culture of those in our environment that we see have like-minded values. So many spiritual communities have certain norms. Traditionally, they dress in a particular way, often very conservatively. They have their own lingo. They live by a certain set of rules and regulations that their followers imbibe. And all of this tradition and culture gives us that sense of belonging as we navigate our own spiritual development. So often the challenge of youth is, how do we apply these traditions in our modern world without sacrificing that full expression of our own individuality? So how do we live by these traditional set of values that are so important to us without becoming out of touch with the real world? And also, as the world progresses, culture does change, culture does evolve. So what aspects of our belief systems can we reevaluate as a generation without losing the gist of the principles that we're also responsible for preserving for the next generation to come? As a relatively young person today, I know that the world is so very different from that which existed when most of these scriptures were written. Young people today are not the only ones in time to question the world in which we live in, and certainly not the first to interrogate the religious institutions that we belong to, who help us navigate that world as we discover our purpose for actually being here. So the purpose of today, as you rightfully said, is to really reflect on the life of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and who he was as a young spiritualist. He was born in the 1800s in India, and from a very young age, this great personality was revered as one of the greatest spiritual mentors of society. His writings and learnings from the exemplary life that he lived actually carry on today and throughout all 195 countries of this modern world, where thousands of his great grand disciples or followers like myself, we continue to find inspiration from his life. His life really serves as a moral compass because he walked a similar path to our own in his youth, but he very seriously took to spiritual life and became a master, something rare and special, of Vedic philosophy. And on this foundation, he in his later years became a revolutionary, rebelling against cultural norms within his own spiritual community. And it wasn't just any norms, it was those that he felt threatened to stifle the widespread sharing of Vedic knowledge. It was so important to him that the knowledge contained in the sacred texts of the Srimad Bhagavatam, of the Bhagavad Gita and Chaitanya Charitamrita be accessible to anyone who was seeking true knowledge of the self and anyone that was looking to deepen their eternal relationship with the Supersoul, the Absolute Truth or God, who we in ISKCON call Krishna, meaning one who is all attractive. I think what inspires some of us the most about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and why this year's annual lecture is actually dedicated to him is really about the degree to which he lived by what he taught. So that's what Acharya actually means. It means, it's a Sanskrit word that describes a person or a leader who is well versed in the literatures, but ultimately who teaches the principles by example. So he was born in 1874 in the afternoon of the 6th of February. And he was born near Lord Jagannath's temple in Puri, somewhere in the northeastern region of India, where he became the fourth son of another great person, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, and also Srimati Bhagavati Devi, who was his mother. So similar to the African belief system, interestingly, there were signs at his appearance that demonstrated that he had unique spiritual gifts or unique spiritual inclination. It said that he was born with the umbilical cord still wrapped around his neck. Other signs of a child coming into the world with a spiritual calling, which are recognized in African culture, are babies that are born with the amniotic sac still fully intact, or even with just the membrane partially enclosing the head of the child. So as a child, he gravitated towards worship of the Lord in deity form. But at the same time, he was a brilliant student of both the modern education system and also philosophy. He was an intellectual. He attended college. And he studied there mathematics, astrology, and language. He studied Sanskrit. And then later he went on to become a published and celebrated author. And he decided that he would write exclusively about spiritual subject matters and also histories. But what was quite phenomenal about him is that even though he was the celebrated scholar, when it came time to make a pivotal decision in his own life in terms of choosing a guru whose instructions he would surrender to for the rest of his life. He sought guidance from someone that would have been, who was quite a simple person. He sought guidance from an elderly renunciant by the name of Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji. And this person was a illiterate personality, living in a quiet, faraway solitude, away from society, in the forest. And what was he doing in the forest? He was fully immersed almost all day and all night in one activity, chanting and meditating on the Sanskrit names of God, which describe God's qualities. We still practice this tradition of mantra meditation, and we every day are chanting the names Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, learning from his guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he himself then took on this monumental step, which not every spiritually inclined person does. But he decided in his 30s, his early 30s, to take the renounced order of life, which basically meant that he gave up all of his materialistic or worldly pursuits. And he, like his guru, became a renunciant. But he had a purpose for doing this. He wanted to become a preacher and to share the knowledge with others. And he also wanted to be intimately and deeply, uninterrupted, conversing with God, glorifying and hearing God through meditation, and also living a very controlled, disciplined life of practicing full control over the senses and desires of the body, including vegetarianism and celibacy. Now, if we take a moment to think about this, he didn't do this at retirement, I was counting the years the other day, and I was saying, sure, I've got almost 30 years still before I qualify for retirement. And what does one do at that stage? But he didn't wait until the end of his life to take to his spirituality seriously. He did it even younger than I am, in his early 30s. And that's something to ponder over. But this was one of the first things that stood out about him, because he entered into this priestly order or ashram, and he took this lifelong vow of chanting 300,000 names of Krishna, which is about 192 beads, rounds of beads every day. So that's a snapshot summary of how he spent his youth. And we'll soon go into the result of those actions. How did his life turn out? And how did that transform modern day society? But first, I want to pause here to just bring us back to today and think about how we, as spiritually inclined youth, spend our time today in comparison to how he spent his time in his youth. And if we think about that, what are we likely to accomplish in our own lives in the years ahead as a direct result of where we invest our time today and the people that we choose to associate with? So I thought, let me bring in some statistics to paint a picture of what it was like, what he was like then, and where we are today. So in his 20s and 30s, first of all, he very early on understood the deeper circumstances of his birth, and he knew that he had this inclination towards spirituality. So he nurtured it and he developed it to his full potential and took initiation from a guru and dedicated his life to it. Think about modern day youth. You know, one could argue that we are still grappling with a sense of identity. And although we are advancing on our understanding of the self on a material level, I mean, just look at the diversity of the expression of self in the spectrum of the LGBTQIA plus community, where we recognize that the body that one is born with poorly reflects how one identifies with in terms of their gender and their sexuality. And that is progressive. But more important than challenging traditional norms of roles assigned to men and women, there is this gap in our enthusiasm for interrogating deeply, who am I beyond this body? What is the true nature of my soul? And what is the purpose of my existence, regardless of the likes and dislikes of the body that I've inherited based on the laws of nature? Another comparison is that he invested in his education, and he went to college. He pursued a tertiary education, and he studied both materialistic sciences and philosophies such as astrology. And as a result, he earned the respect of his peers, and he was seen to be this intellectual prowess, and became an author with a platform, using that platform to influence many, many others very meaningfully. In contrast, the data released by Stats South Africa just last year in May shows that a third of South Africa's population are between the ages of 15 and 34 years old, so they qualify as youth. But that in that category, youth aged 15 to 24 recorded the highest unemployment rates, and that ranked at 62% unemployment within that category. And the youth aged 25 to 34 had a 41% unemployment rate. Furthermore, approximately 3.7 million youngsters out of the total pool of 10.2 million youth population were neither employed, but really surprisingly, not in any education or formal training. So those statistics are scary, and it's reasonable to become worried and think that the future is bleak for those who don't take seriously or don't take up their schooling and pursue further education, given the opportunities being available, of course. But on the contrary, if spiritually dedicated youth decide to excel in the areas of education, society would look up to them and come to them seeking guidance from them as experts. And when we start to share about spirituality, that would become a very impactful delivery. A last comparison about his youth is how he had the wisdom to approach a bona fide guru who demonstrated to him, based on his own assessment of his character, the qualities of true value in spirituality. It wasn't about his, scholarly nature. It wasn't about his popularity, within the community. He felt very drawn to his guru, and he, in his own words, expressed how taking initiation from him actually transformed his devotional life because no education could have prepared him for the good fortune of understanding scripture in the lived expression of it. He said, and this is a quote that I found, he says, "Before I met my master, I had not written anything about real religion. Up to that time, my idea of religion was confined to books and to strict ethical life. But that sort of life was found imperfect unless I came into touch with the practical side of things." So if we think about ourselves today, where do we draw inspiration and guidance? I mean, think about it. The influence of social media is undeniable. It is such a powerful tool, and depending on how you use that tool, it can amplify a very positive message and expand our reach, or it can lead our youth down a spiral of a make believe world, which is programmed to celebrate those who appear to have and make those who don't have their worshippers, or at least leave them wanting and desiring to live out a life that someone else is pursuing. It's also interesting how it's unified the global community, programming us to all want to kind of look the same. It's almost like we all want to eat the same food, travel, to have the same experiences, and all of this systematic kind of conditioning is ultimately resulting in us losing our individuality. Not to mention the time that social media takes up. Social media keeps us busy. From the time that we open our eyes, we are looking at our smartphones in the morning, all the way throughout the day, and even into the evening when we just want to wind down before resting. Again, we're plugged in. I mean, never before has a generation been so well documented and recorded and even tracked. There is this constant stimulation from the marketers behind the scenes to distract us. And, they want to draw us in, distract us from our real lives and the peacefulness of our minds. And the purpose is to sell us products. We're living in a continuous advert or continuous ongoing billboard. But that all takes us away from our much needed quiet time, where you get an opportunity to sift through the days and sift through the experiences of your life, deciding very carefully what you find favorable for your spiritual life, and to very intuitively and wisely discard that which you find unfavorable for your spiritual life. It's so important that we protect our mental space and make it a very fertile, conducive environment where we can grow and develop emotionally, where we can have emotional maturity. And all of these tools and building blocks help us in the advancement of understanding our philosophy deeper and deeper. But with every scroll of a fingertip on TikTok or Instagram, we are following the most influential people currently guiding society on social media. I mean, the Kardashians are there and other prominent figures in pop culture. And I mean, they are emulating what they value. And, we should be mindful as spiritualists to not blindly follow or become influenced, and not to subscribe to teachers who really offer nothing of substance when it comes to spiritual matters, and not get caught up in that repetitive loop of watching others while actually we ourselves are going nowhere and really not doing anything. So if we go back to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and the pockets of investment that he made in the choices of his youth, what did that result in? Well, he had some exceptional accomplishments. And just to name a few, at the age of 9, he memorized the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. I don't know how many 9-year-olds you know. I don't even know how many 25-year-olds you know who can do that. That's quite extraordinary. At the age of 31, he began to deliver public lectures or discourses on the philosophy and practice of Chaitanya Vaishnavism. And he gathered a following of young Bengalis, some of whom actually became his students. And later on in their lives, he sent them to go and preach in the Western world, such as our beloved founder, Acharya of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada. He was an author, and he was a writer, he was a published author, not once, but many times over. And as a writer, he was known for his intensity in terms of his writing style. And they called him the Lion Guru because his words and convictions were so revolutionary. He established the Gaudiya Math, which is a dynamic, like missionary and educational institution, which currently today or has a few branches. I think 64 branches across India and 3 centers abroad, including in Burma, Germany, and in England. As a character, he didn't shy away from any conflict, particularly if there would be some spiritual value. And he wrote and delivered an abstract paper at a public debate with other esteemed scholars within spirituality. And they were debating about the controversial caste system practice, which was really, at that time, the norm was disqualifying those who were not born in a Brahminical or priestly lineage from worshipping a specific form of the deity, regardless of whether they had, merit as Vaishnavas or very serious practitioners. And his approach was very strategic when he delivered this, his commentary. He started off by praising the important position that Brahmanas held as repositories of, ritualistic spiritual knowledge. But then he went back to his knowledge of Shastra, scriptural references, to assert that actually scriptures say that Vaishnavas should be respected even more due to their devotional practice and not just because of their DNA or hereditary position. He also established multiple temples. I mean, if you've tried to establish even one Namahata or preaching program, or in my youth, my real early youth, just to keep the Bhakti Yoga Society going, took so much effort. But he established many temples. And, his contribution to society is that he's created places for people to go and find that serenity that we so crave. But also to find at those temples good association in the community of others who are living life guided by morality and spiritual principles. I also love that he had a vision. He was a visionary. He wasn't complacent. He contributed so much to preserving our literatures. He was an entrepreneur. He owned several printing presses. And what were they printing? What were they producing? They were dedicated solely to printing spiritual collateral. I guess the last real brilliant accomplishment for me, which I could relate to, is how he employed every accessible resource that he had in his preaching mission. Most renunciants, when you imagine, a guru, they reject all the things of the world. And yet, for the mission, he adopted so many modern tools. Most renunciants would walk from village to village or travel by ox and cart, but he occasionally and quite frequently used a car just to get there quicker, more efficiently. I think he also used the radio, which is a media tool, to broadcast messages. He used the tools. He never became absorbed in them. He was responsible about why he was using them. And ultimately, that led to progressing humanity. So, on reflection of his life, but perhaps there are 8 lessons that we could learn and take from the life of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The first one is, it is possible to be a spiritual rebel, but for a noble and worthy cause. Secondly, spend your youthful time and energy very wisely, investing in both spiritual and secular education. That'll make you a person of influence. Thirdly, it's really important to have a clear vision for where you want to take your life. And not just to have that vision, but to also pursue it with conviction. Number 4, I think it's important to really be willing and genuinely willing to learn. And as young people, to accept that it's true, we don't know everything. And that's okay, because, we are connected to a community where we can lean on the guidance of multiple bona fide spiritual masters. Number 5, we don't need to be afraid to be innovative, and entrepreneurial and bold about sharing with the world who we are as spiritualists as we are. I think people are looking for diversity. They're looking for, those that they can be drawn to and go to when they're searching for a particular offering. And we don't need to stand in the shadows or be worried about how the world will receive us. I think there's a lot of value in being confident and bold about who we are. Number 6, we can debate controversial and difficult topics amongst one another and with our seniors, particularly when there are norms within our society that stifle our society and also keep us uninspired. There is space to adjust and to shape the culture of our society for a brighter future. Number 7, it's really important to be resourceful and to use every available tool to transform Vedic wisdom into content that will keep us engaged. And I think this is an area that the youth can really excel at. There shouldn't be any restrictive rules, I think we should find freedom of expression and make our mark, make our contribution in terms of adding to that library of content that will be available for many, many young people to come. And number 8, I think, which was the most important one to me, is that no matter what, be true to your vows, especially setting time to reflect in quiet solitude, alone, chanting your japa or meditating, however it is you choose to pray, because that is the gateway to direct association with God. So it is possible as a young person to be active in society with traditional values, but not to be influenced away from those core values. And I think there are some youngsters who I believe Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would have either liked or by his association may have even become his disciples. I mean, I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa, and I work within the municipality, and I often marvel at the achievements of our executive mayor, Jordan Hill Lewis. I think there's a Nigerian writer, very, very internationally acclaimed, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, feminist. But all of these people are taking up space within society, becoming famous within their circles. And for me, it's just a reminder, seeing their character and seeing what they're becoming famous for and respected for. It's really about them being trailblazing achievers, but also uncompromising in their humility, in their dedication to serve others, and in their family values. I believe that among there, somewhere out there, is you, the young spiritualist, that the world is just waiting for to take their place amongst these giants. So I encourage all of us to become all that you can be and to stay connected. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Navina Radhika, for setting the scene so wonderfully and unpacking the life and journey of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. You highlighted so many points that we can reflect on as young people, his achievements, but also the lessons we can actually learn and implement. And I think that's something really remarkable. So often we hear how wonderful these stories are, but to actually take them and look at the practicalities of them in our own journeys as young people, I think that was really beautifully done. So thank you. One point that really stood out for me was rebelling against cultural norms that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur found stifling. I think that's so beautiful. In your presentation, you spoke about some correlations between African and Indian culture. And I think this leads me to welcome Harikanta, who is a writer, singer, and artist. Harikanta Devidasi, the servant of the beautiful Lord known as Harika, Dimple Sharma, is a disciple of His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Swami. After graduating from the University of Michigan in health policy research, she moved to Stanford University in California for further studies in international human rights law. She spent years working in Silicon Valley in Yelp Inc. and later moved back home to pursue marketing communication in well renowned agencies. After contemplating the purpose of life, she decided to leave the corporate world behind and move into a monastery in London to practice a simpler life. Trained singer, artist, she has spent a substantial time in Bhaktivedanta Manor in England as a nun, studying various philosophy and serving at the education department in the School of Bhakti.
Thank you so much for this warm welcome. And as undeserving as I am, I'm grateful for your team to give me this opportunity to speak about Kenya and our youth initiatives and bring into light the learnings from our services. As we know, the youth are the flower of a country or a society. They need a sublime bridge between tradition and modernity to take up a diligent spiritual purpose. Spiritual leaders in our tradition have not only respectfully rebelled against the odds, yet in order to meet the need of the time and to push a sacred mission forward, they have learned to accommodate paradigm shifts and meet the youth where they are at. In Kenya, musicians such as Sauti Soul, Ian Nene, Keithan, and myself, Harikanta, are trying to build an inclusive association between modernity and traditional spirituality. With our first creative project, Jambo Kirtan, Karibu Keshav, Wimbo Zawema, we introduced a music album where we tried to reach out to the youth to educate them on a modern way of expressing their musical creativity in respect to tradition and our rich spiritual culture. There are 3 points I'd like to speak about today relating to the conscious youth in Kenya. The first idea is affecting. What issues at hand are affecting Kenyans? The youth of Kenya, around 4.5 million Kenyan youth, are affected by unemployment. We have an educated, unproductive workforce. These youth are given hopes through education systems, yet there seems to be a failure in the system to acknowledge their needs, their interests, their concerns, and their day to day just struggles between life. This in turn is leading to increased drug, substance abuse, and violence. And further along, there are many undisclosed mental health issues. In Kenya, particularly, we face a significant challenge with a suicide rate of 11% per 100,000 population. So there is a need for spirituality because everyone is struggling, especially the youth. But how we approach them and meeting them where they are at is needed. The second idea that I'd like to discuss is aspiring. The bridge between tradition and modernity is required for the youth. So that through creativity and compassionate mediums, so that they can relate to the concerns of the youth and so that they can be aspired to pick up a spiritual lifestyle. For example, we can inspire the local African leaders to express their love for their talents, be it in science, art, history, and contribute that to a spiritual institution. But that requires an open mindedness to include new ideas. And through this association, through broadening our association, we allow them to respect the traditions that come from our scriptures. And not only that, we allow them to grow these ideas on spiritual platforms. Like we have lots of social media platforms where we have not yet reached out onto, but the content can become really relevant to Kenyans in Swahili languages. So we want the youth to be healthy, not only just on a bodily platform, but on a spiritual platform so that they can be more productive, no matter what field they come from. And the third idea that I'd like to share is the idea of association. The youth need to associate with the scriptures, and that will allow them to lead a life of peace, love, tranquility. A lot of us are taught how to succeed, but we are not taught how to handle failures or how to deal with failures or how to manage problems. And a lot of these scriptures allow us in the modern age to appreciate from learnings of previous spiritual leaders how to adapt our life and our situation. Modern age education is not providing them with the tools to deal with everyday life problems. Systematic education of scriptures through new mediums such as Instagram, YouTube, will allow Kenyan youth, and we're trying to make it open to the Kenyan youth, that way they can come to a spiritual place online, they can ask questions, and they can feel safe discussing them with other enthusiastic spiritualists. So I'd like to say that the youthful leaders of spirituality today are searching for a space where they can fulfill both material needs and spiritual practices, respectively. In my experience, I've felt motivated to engage with the youth on several social media platforms, and Instagram being a priority for me in Kenya, as this is the number one tool for addressing the concerns and receiving the needs of the youth. I've been engaging with questions and answers, and we find a way to keep the youth determined to participate. So I can say that confidently that I met a variety of students on my book distribution and street canvassing adventures. They're constantly discouraged from associating with our campuses or institutions, which the traditional institutions, because there's a certain norm. But if we understand their likes, needs, concerns, interests, feelings, be it fashion or technology, we'll be able to invite them into these traditional atmospheres with more confidence. I feel often it requires having a ground of open hearted thinking, which is parallelly molded by respect for a family of traditions. In respect to Kenyan youth, I personally do not see a problem in creative expression of youth, as I've explored in my own projects, while trying to cultivate their spirituality. Everyone is on a journey, and expressing of their talents is a medium to encourage their service to humanity. In order to encourage the spirit of making ancient scriptures more relevant in this time and era, we need youthful participants who will be taking up the responsibility as creative ambassadors to take content from our spiritual scriptures and activating them in our lives through new mediums of enthusiastic engagement such as Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. Of course, this requires some grounding to the roots by nurturing ourselves in deep spiritual practice every day. Yet, I feel a little creativity can transform the entire landscape and bring life or color to a boring landscape. So, we need to build more landscape technologies that allow both tradition and modernity to meet. I feel this will really inspire not only Kenyan youth, but the youth in general. The need for innovative interventions to inspire the youth is the urgency of the time. Our efforts in applying these creative strategies will help us build a connection with the youth and inspire them to lead a life which is spiritually motivated. Bridging the gap means developing professionalism and integrity in our approach to maximize our efforts to deploy the youth in building a relationship with their spiritual purposes. This bridge will help the youth, especially Kenyan youth or youth anywhere in the world, to make more informed choices, reduce their chances of being vulnerable, especially in the material world where they experience lots of challenges, allow them to scope with the idea of mentorship, capacity building, and rewarding or appreciating their innate talents and skills in a resourceful way where they can apply them in a spiritual institution. So, encouraging the youth and investing in their abilities, not only in a modern way, but also allowing them to interact with the traditions and respecting them. The span of youth expires very quickly. So, this spiritual training, I believe, is very necessary. And I'm hoping that we can all, as leaders, help in executing this sort of training where an amalgam between modernity and tradition is appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harikanta, for sharing the situation or experiences that you've had in and around youth development, and the issues facing young people within the Kenyan context. I think to summarize it into 3 points, namely affecting, aspiring, and association, is what I've taken away from what you've just shared. Both our speakers today, both the keynote address by Navina Radhika as well as Harikanta and her share, has taught us the theoretical and practical side to this conversation around modernity and traditionalism and how those two play a role in and around each other. So, with that, we're going to move into a bit more of an interactive space with both Navina Radhika and Harikanta and explore a bit more and unpack this process of unboxing traditional modernity. As someone who's deeply influenced by ancient philosophies, I believe the teachings of disruptors like Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur hold a significant relevance in today's rapid evolving world. His philosophies emphasize the universality of spiritual principles and devotion. We advocate for the inclusion of all people in spiritual practices, irrespective of social or caste backgrounds. And this approach of breaking down social barriers resonates strongly in this era marked by inequality, identity politics, and social divisions. So, with that, I'm going to turn to our guests and I'm going to pose a few questions. Navina, Radhika, I'm going to come to you first. Has there been a time in your journey as a young person where you had to look at your traditional upbringing in the context of this modern world? And how did you navigate challenges in that space?
Thank you, Avash. What a wonderful question. There have been many occasions when I've experienced these challenges. The earliest one that I remember was becoming a devotee as a teenager. And I lived in Pretoria, and I would go to Durban for the Rath Yatra, where my mother was based, because I lived with my father in Pretoria. And she was very supportive, of my freedom of religion and expression. But one of the things that really didn't settle well with her, having been part of a generation that were freedom fighters and fought so hard for equal recognition of the races and equal value of African people in South Africa. One of the things that didn't settle well in her modern democracy was when I wanted to attend the Rath Yatra dressed as I am now in a sari and tilak, because to her, she could not understand why I needed to change my African identity and adopt the dress of an Indian, lady in order to practice my religion. And so that was a major obstacle for our relationship and our family. And my spiritual master actually helped me with my mindset and encouraged me that although there is benefit to practicing our rituals and our culture in the traditional way by wearing this plain, single, unstitched cloth, to someone who's not familiar with the faith, it becomes a disturbance. And he encouraged me to dress in a manner that would not disturb my mother's perceptions, about what was actually important, which is what I was actually practicing.
As young people, we often are very particular about how we appear, especially in this age of social media. Appearances are everything. And so it's really wonderful to actually hear how in your own journey you've reflected or you've actually overcome that challenge and how support and mentorship came into the came into play in and around this element. Harikanta, I'm going to turn to you. You have also experienced some sort of challenges as a young person managing traditionalism and modernity? Did you have a fear of breaking traditional spaces and creating your own narrative and your relationship between God and yourself? And how did you navigate that space?
Thank you so much for this question. I think we all go through these challenges, but for me, the anchor and the source of um, finding direction was a strong spiritual mentor who, as well, encouraged me to take those risks. And it was difficult, especially coming because in Kenya we have a lot of respect for traditional things. So everyone wants to stick to the traditional ways. When a young girl, um, who's not maybe African but very Indian, comes up with the idea to launch an album, and especially being in a female body, it can be very loud for the traditional or the seniors or the elders. But what kept me anchored was that not only did I believe in what I was trying to pursue, but I had a senior mentor, like my spiritual master, who was guiding me and making me believe that I should continue on this path, because there are many other people like me who, like you said, when you're on social media, it's how you look. Everything is how you look, how you present it, how it's marketed, what is the font, what is the sound. So the aesthetics are really important. And that's how the youth wants it to be presented. But when I when I was bringing these ideas to the senior devotees, of course, for them it was a new idea. But as we hear, slowly but surely, um, now it's much appreciated, and now I don't face as many challenges that I faced in the beginning initially. In fact, many people come to me and now they're encouraging the idea of doing more projects like this. But initially, me and my team, we had faith in each other, and I think
Mhm.
it's also important to have a team of individuals. Maybe it's a group of youngsters or a group of people. You can just sit down, you are practicing a certain faith, and your mission is to do something greater. So when you have that team, you get that sort of like backbone and support to go ahead and do what you're doing. So having a spiritual mentor, having the right kind of association, and of course, what you spiritually practice on your own also gives you the strength to overcome those challenges, because life is full of challenges, whether it's for the youth or the seniors. We're all going to face challenges. Um, but I was not afraid of making those rebellious moves, because I had mentors who themselves at their times were also a little bit rebellious, and they encouraged me to continue on this path, because I feel they had a vision for me. And they could see that what I'm doing is going to have a bigger spiritual impact for the youth, and it would
Wow.
be beneficial.
Spoken on 2 points that I think are particularly powerful: mentorship, definitely, and community. Having both of those elements in one's journey as a young individual is so important. And you shared how there's so many issues facing young individuals in your community. And I think a lot of the reflections I've had in my own space is based off of the fact that the people you surround yourself with have a big role to play. As a person who has some influence amongst young people, do you feel there's a need for spiritual reformation? Because this community or the society we live in, we often feel and see many young people going through depression or economic struggles, social ills in our communities, and just fighting to survive. How do we find peace in such a climate?
That is true. Everyone is suffering. And we can see from our youth, they're given a promise that, education, if you receive a certain amount of education, or you receive a certain amount of training, you're going to find a job, and then you're going to live the dream, whether be it American dream or Kenyan dream. We can see that. However, there is almost, like I said earlier, 4.5 million people in Kenya who are sitting there, qualified, overqualified, and they're sitting at home unproductive. And because Kenya, a lot of the Africans are, culturally, they're farm based. Most of they go home to their parents in the farm. So what happens is a lot of the men, they're sitting on the farms and they're getting drunk or substance abuse or using, and then this causes a sort of a domino effect, where because of that substance abuse a crime will occur or some violence against women will occur. So yes, there is a very big need for spirituality. For example, a student who is studying medicine in a university might have been accustomed to getting A's, and all of a sudden, one semester, it just gets E's or something, and then he thinks it's the end of the world. So spirituality plays a really important part in teaching people how to handle problems, how to handle failure. We're taught to succeed, but we're not taught how to manage failure. We don't learn about these concepts when we go into material education. At the same time, spiritual training, spiritual education for the youth is very important so that they can learn many things, how to manage their time well, how to take care of themselves, not only feeding their mind, but feeding their soul, feeding their heart. And many youngsters nowadays, they don't even have good relationships because the biggest relationship they have is with their gadgets. So they don't know how to interact with people. Earlier, when we were younger, we would see children would go out. There was something known as playtime. Now you don't have playtime. You have, so they're watching something on an iPad or an iPod or something. So the youth today, they really need this spiritual knowledge, spiritual training. And I feel how we take it to them is also important. What sort of interventions, the creative interventions we use to approach them is also important, because that will help us understand, or will actually help them succeed in their spirituality. Sometimes we
Mm.
have to go at their level. It's not about, okay, I'm at this level, I'm just going to dump that there. But I think, like social media, there is so much room for taking all the content that we have scripturally in the literatures and adapting that to modern day problems of the youth, which has not been tapped, especially like in Kenya. I think it can be done in Swahili, but nobody's engaging that field as yet. There's so much room to do that, for that. And definitely there's need for some spiritual training, spiritual education all the time.
The point of playtime versus screen time really screamed at me personally. Um, and with that being said, we have to look at the relevance of spirituality amongst young people. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whilst Navina was sharing in her keynote address, unpacked the usage of technology, of media, even. And so, Navina, Radhika, I want to come to you and ask, is there a need, or how does spirituality remain relevant in this very fast-paced community? And I'd also like for you to expand a little further. You shared in your bio about the fact that you've joined a community that spiritual practices was different. How have you navigated two communities, or two cultural spaces, and how do you bring that into your current beliefs?
That's two questions. Okay. Um, let me start with the second one because it's foremost in my mind. Yes, I come from a traditional Zulu culture, and I also come from a family tradition where we are not African traditionalists. We are religious Christian people. My grandparents were missionaries. So, how do I navigate the two? I'm so grateful that I identified my spiritual master early on, and he played such an active role in helping me to remain respectful of my family, especially my parents, who he reminded me are one of the first gurus that a person has. And he very early on formed a partnership with my father and reassured him that together we will give guidance to this young soul, spiritually and materially, and I was protected in both respects. So I navigated it by surrendering to my authorities, but recognizing the role of both my parents, my birth parents, and my spiritual parent. And that made things very easy because they really made sure that at the heart of it, they wanted me to be able to progress, spiritually and work together. Of course, it's relevant. Spirituality is not something we practice, it's who we are. It's a, we have a duty to understand who we are. And spirituality is the method through which we figure out what we're doing here and our purpose. So, as long as we exist, spirituality is the most relevant subject matter. So, absolutely, in this changing, evolving material world where we journey through, no matter what it presents, the most relevant question is that of self discovery. So, the important thing is to keep that at the forefront of your mind and know that there's an expiry date. All of us will pass from this world, and we don't know when that will happen. So, the time that we have here, we need to carefully, depending on where we find ourselves on the planet, find a way to sustain ourselves within the world, but not lose sight of finding ourselves. And and we can only do that through learning about God, learning about the soul, and investing in that direction.
I mean, just the point that spirituality is not something you practice, it's who you are. I think that speaks volumes to me as a young person and to many others about the fact that spirituality is not this far off philosophy that's unattainable, but it's actually very ingrained in us. And with that, Harikanta, I come back to you. You, as a young person, often have to face, you shared you had to face quite a bit of challenges just setting yourself up against the norm. Do you feel that there are older, outdated norms that derail from simple, loving, higher thinking?
Yes, there are many challenges that I've faced in all the projects that I have been involved in Kenya. But like they say, if you start to see every challenge as an opportunity, then you also start appreciating those traditional norms in a new perspective. Basically, we are trying to creatively bring those same norms to the youth, but in a more creative way. um, I feel, yes, sometimes we do feel demotivated, or we feel like, you have to break all the rules. But I don't think there's a need for that. I feel there's a need, like, you use a certain, like when we're cooking food, we use a certain ingredient certain way. But if you put too much chili, then the entire recipe or the entire meal is destroyed. So similarly, we might take certain concepts, traditional concepts, and try to bring them in a more modern way. But what really matters is the intention we have behind that. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to connect each and every soul, each and every heart, to understand that they're not this body, they're the soul, that's what our real constitution is. So I feel, there's always room to experiment, there's always room to explore. You should not limit yourself, because also that is a disservice. But at the same time, the intention and your, like I said earlier, your mentors and what their opinions and advices are, really help you execute a certain thing to the best level. Because what's going on in the consciousness of our heart is really important when we are trying to do that certain endeavor. And then I think, by some divine intervention, it will reach out to the youth, because of course we have to believe in a few things, like that there's a divine intervention which helps us somewhere in between all those challenges.
There is an increase in the representation of LGBTQI plus individuals, but what role does inclusivity and representation play in this context of the community we live in?
I mean, I touched on it a bit in the keynote that there's no place for discrimination in our society. I find it difficult to conceive that there may be someone who is serious about their spirituality and subscribing to an ethical, moral code, who would not embrace, diversity, and be, tolerant and compassionate towards the journey that other living entities and other people are embarking on. So, I mean, it's difficult for some people to reconcile their traditional norms and their conservative views. But really, I feel that the issues of gender and sexuality and anything else that may come are so personal in nature. You know, it really is about going beyond the identity with this body. I think if we remain fixated on agreeing or disagreeing on what is right or wrong in terms of what people identify themselves as, we're going to shortchange ourselves from the real purpose of being in the spiritual community, which is about see me and help me to see myself as that eternal spiritual soul, um, who is trying to understand what is my relationship with others, but ultimately, what is my eternal relationship with God, with Krishna? That is an important question. Everything else we navigate, everything else um, we embrace and we make it easier for one another to foster, positive relationships. But it's certainly nothing to divide a community of spiritualists. It is something we should embrace.
Yes, I think this is very important, and I'm glad that you raised this. And I feel like we are a movement of love, we're a movement of touching hearts. So, by putting boundaries just because of whatever dress somebody chooses to wear, I feel we are going to limit ourselves as a conscious movement, which is trying to help everyone, because indeed everyone is suffering and they're suffering in their own particular shell. So I feel it's not a youth problem. It's basically everyone needs to come together and try to see or create different mechanisms in which they can engage every single soul to do the best service they're meant to do. And that can be the greatest service you can do for the divine. Because if you limit somebody or create an obstruction to them just because of what dress they're wearing, because we're all wearing certain dresses, and you limit their service or they're in, they're a flower and they're trying to blossom in whichever way they have been created. So I think more than that, it's more important to see we need to develop that spiritual maturity where we can engage every single soul to connect heart to heart. But it takes a lot of spiritual maturity to see through those dresses, to see through those small petty things, which, there's a greater goal of spirituality, which is how to feed people internally, how to create happiness internally. And materially, as youth, they're always battling outside. There's always a battle outside. So when they come for to seek spiritual shelter, they need that intervention where you're connecting to them, where you're caring for them, where you're providing that support for them, that heart to heart connection. So there shouldn't be boundaries, especially in a spiritual institution. I feel that's my personal.
Young people, are they aware of the impact they have on key aspects like activism, social media, content creation, inclusivity, and representation? I mean, we're speaking about their role here and we're speaking about them as young people ourselves, but are they aware of the space? And to go a little bit deeper, spiritual grounding is required to have a higher consciousness. And this we use to approach for the benefit of all generations, all groupings and communities. So, is there a space for this within the Gen Z, the Gen Alpha, especially considering the digital era that we are currently experiencing? How do we navigate that for young people, as young people, with young people?
For us, by us. um, you know, Not only are they aware of the impact of activism and social media, they are creating the platforms. They are propelling all of us into TikTok for a generation that may have started out with YouTube and Facebook, and they are demanding, they are owning that space. They're saying, we're not going to switch to the news and to our televisions to find out what's happening in the world. We're going to follow our favorite influences, and then we're going to interact. We're going to tell you what we think about what we're seeing. So they're more than aware. They are the change agents in terms of how we communicate going into the future. And absolutely, spiritual grounding is required to have a higher consciousness, right? If we don't find ourselves firmly entrenched in our spirituality, if we don't find our feet quickly, we can easily get the wrong idea, and we can also easily lose our way. You know, that creeper of devotion can easily be bent and swayed if we allow it to be. So, yes, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it is absolutely critical that them living in this digital era and in this digital space, they have an alternative place where they can draw content from, which they can then express and shape and share on this digital stream, and help us to interrupt the conversations with content that is going to keep them protected and safe, from everything that's out there. In the absence of them doing that, we are at the mercy of a world that is so stimulating and demanding of our attention, that we will quickly lose what has been preserved so carefully by our acharyas, in order for us to have it.
I particularly know that I dictate how I use my social media as a young person. I don't let my Instagram feed tell me what I like. I need to tell my Instagram feed what I like. So I love the way you just phrased that and wrap that up so beautifully. Harikanta, I'm coming to you, and this is my final question to you. There's so many young individuals who are well positioned in community and society and activism. They're influencing politics, climate change, art, and you being someone who's also within the creative industry. Humanity and its improvements to society remains the core of their principles. They're trying to better their community. But this is not every young person's ambition or role or duty. So, how do we inspire other young people to live consciously for the benefit of humanity? How do we invoke this feeling of influencer status, if you will? But how do we get more young people into the space of being conscious of their activities and them?
Great. That's an awesome question. And I feel we have to, for the youth, we have to meet them where they are. We have to, sometimes in life, there's no need to offer philosophy to somebody who needs a hug. So where the youth are, we need to come and meet them where they are. Because a lot of the times I feel, even as a youth, I was more inspired by the smaller things. And then I picked up the philosophy very quickly, and the instructions and the serious attitude came when I observed the behavior. So going back to the basics of humanity, which is kindness, truthfulness, loving exchanges, having heart to heart connections, conversations, creating a space for these youth, because everyone is human and we all have relationships. We're all, one is a mother, one is a sister. Every single person has relationships. So these interactions, our own behavior, before we preach to them, when we preach to ourselves, I think that's the best way to get to them, is to meet them where they are, and trying to understand the small nuances that we might miss because we're a big spiritual institution. We're focusing on the macro level of things, but actually life starts at the seed, at the micro level. What are those behaviors or interactions that might inspire somebody who's at a very big position, very affluent, super influential. But it comes down to the basics. When they're at home, they just need the basic things. That's why it's simple living and higher thinking. So we can reach out more to them. And of course, it's also diversifying and creating sort of mechanisms to diversify the content we share there, not only limiting the youth and just saying no, there's a traditional way of doing this, but understanding the deeper intentions of those youth trying to share that content, and what is the domino effect of sharing that as well. I feel like when you have a strong spiritual center focus yourself, when you're preaching to yourself, then that inspires others to look at your behavior and change. So I think it's very important to meet them where they are. What are the basic things? What are the simple things? It's very simple for the simple, or it's complicated for the complicated.
We started off this lecture series by saying and looking at the life of Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and how he challenged social norms. And I think young people in our space, in our communities, in their individual capacities are doing just that. I'd like to thank our keynote speaker, Navina Radhika Dasi, as well as our guest speaker, Hari Kanta, for coming on board and sharing their research, their understanding of the topic of unboxing traditional modernity. With that, I would further like to thank the BBT Africa team and all of you who have joined in to hear what it's like for young people in the space of modernity and traditionalism, and how we bring both these spaces together in the intersectionality of our identities.
Thank you for watching. Follow us at BBT Africa on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.